Everyone, welcome to Blue Dragon Universe, and this is the Excel Advanced course. So, as you have like yesterday, where we have left is we have kind of seen how to play with names, and we know that names reside in formulas, name manager. If you just press, I think F3, right, you should be select a cell and press F3, you should be able to see the names, right? So now earlier when we pressed F3, there was no name, but now since there are names, if you just click on, so this will basically F3 is actually using this. So if I close this, right, and if I go here using formula, here also you'll be able to see this thing called paste names, right? So in either way it works. You can also press F5. F5 will give you the list of the names, right? So that's how it works, right? And F3 will also give you the list of the names, and it can also, you can also paste something, right? So suppose you kind of maybe select this, and suppose I pressed F3 and I'm clicking on paste list. So it will show me the what names we have created and where it is referencing. All the list would be kind of there. It is very handy when sometime you are debugging something, and or when you are something getting the data. So that is the first thing I want you to know. You can also do that from here, right? Go to use in formula and click paste name. Same thing will happen, right? Now we are going to cover some interesting things. So first we are going to see, can we do multiple sheet selection? So suppose for this, we are going to, for like we right now we know, let me cancel this out. Right. So suppose we know that there are, we need to sum this April, and we need to sum this for every month. Sometime we see that in Excel, the data would be kind of repeated, same data, similar structure data would be repeated every month. As for example, month one, month two, month three, right? Or maybe year one, year two, year three, something like that. Or maybe for some different lines of business, data would be reported, and you need to kind of sum it up to check what is the data for April, what is the data, for maybe May, right? So a better way or an interesting way to do that is by creating a name, right? So how we can, kind of do that. So first of all, as we know that we can create a name by going to data, define names, right? So first we are going to go to define names, and suppose we want to, kind of select this, right? So what we are going to do is first we are going to click here, right? So maybe give it a name. I'm calling it data, uh, data, then write May, right? So that will mean the data for May will be present here. Now here you can see it is referring to sheet 1 C16, right? But I actually don't want that. I want this one, right? And I want to select the data for all the tabs, right? So if I press shift button and click on shift 3 and this, right? And then come back to this one and kind of do the control shift, my button shift button was already pressed, and if I do this, so what it will do, it will refer to multiple sheet but same row, right? So it is referring to this row in sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. You can see this, and you can also understand this by seeing this colon means that sheet 1 to sheet 2, right? In this case sheet 3 is between, right? So that is where we are going to press enter. So this is called data main, right? So now if suppose you have to sum, right? So I'm just going to write sum, and I'm going to write data, right? And data main, right? So if I just do data main, so you can see that it is showing me 336. Now 336, that would mean that whatever is the sum here, it would be three times that, because I've copied the same data in all the three sheets, right? So if we do that, it is coming out to be 112, right? You can see that. So 112 into 3, that means the data is captured here as well, and the same data is captured here as well, right? Now the interesting thing here, or maybe sometime which can also create problem, if you create insert a sheet between these two, right? So then that would also be automatically kind of taken into consideration or calculation, right? So ensure that you do not, if you have this sort of sheet covered formula, either you insert it after sheet 2 or or before sheet 1. Do not insert it in between, right? So if I just do that, suppose I create a sheet like this and I copy the same thing following the same structure. I have to follow the same structure, otherwise it will create a mess of the data, right? So suppose I am putting the same thing, it starts from B2, right? So if I do that, and if I come back here, you can see it is now 448, right? So you can see whatever enters inside. So that is why it is from sheet 1 to sheet 2. So whatever comes inside is automatically captured, right? So you have to, if I have to add any sheet outside, then it will not change, right? For example, if I just click on this and create a sheet here, right? So if I move this here, then it will not change. Or suppose if I move this sheet outside this, right? So now it should change back to 336. You can see that, right? So this is very interesting, I believe. And you can select multiple sheet and give it a name, right? Now, another very interesting thing is what I used to call, like this is a some sort of index and match. If you are familiar with index and match, that is, these are lookup function. But whenever we will going to come to that lookup chapter, we are going to do that. But suppose you want this value, which is February and year two, right? So usually these values are kind of taken through by index and match, right? An index and match, as I mentioned, we're going to see that later. But Excel has something called intersection. I think I have spoken about that before. So I'm going to select Feb, right? And this you can do through the name operator, right? Not name operator, but through the name function, right? So I'm using Feb, and I'm also going to use year two, right? So I know this is year two. So this basically tells Excel that there is an intersection. So between Feb and year two, you can see this and this, the intersection is 14, right? So it should give me 14, right? You can see that, right? So in that way, if I just suppose if I do another one, suppose March and year three. So this is basically looking up, right? And I think very few people would be aware of this function. So suppose I'm doing March, right? So I'm putting March and I'm writing year three. I have to give a space, right? So that means intersection, and this is called explicit intersection in Excel. And we're going to see something which we call implicit intersection as well, right? So if I do that, so basically if you just press F2 on this, it shows the intersection, right? F2, so it shows this is the name and this is the name, and that is how we are going to get the result, right? So this is called the explicit intersection, where you are kind of telling Excel, hey, between these two name, I want the name which is common, right? You can have multiple, things like that as well. Like you can select multiple rows, multiple columns, right? In our example, we have only selected March as a row and year as a column, but you can select probably multiple, like there can be an intersection like this intersection with this, right? So you can have some of these two and all of that, right? So you can experiment on your own, and I think you get the point, right? Obviously, we have seen how to put the formulas into a function, like we have just did the sum, right? That 336, I believe. So you already know how to do that calculation. I think I've deleted that, right? So I think you already know. So that is perfectly fine, right? Now another thing, something we call implicit, kind of implicit intersection. And just to explain the process, so I have already created a name called month name, right? So month, if you go here in the name manager, you can see I have created a name called month name, which is referring to this, right? This one, month name, right? So now if you this is called implicit, implicit uh, intersection. So now if you come there to any of this row where this, this all these entries are present, if you come to any of this row and write month name, right? So I'm going to write month name, so that I can now press tab to select this month name. Okay, so you can immediately see that that has been highlighted, and now I want the the result for the maybe the eighth row or the seventh row. Let us, since we are in the seventh row, let us write 7 is to 7, right? So 7 is to 7 means the only the seventh row. So this is the intersection. You can see that, right? The seventh row being intersected by the this one, right? So if I do that, it immediately fetches me May, which is the same thing that we are doing before, but this time it is like we are doing implicit intersection because we are using the row number. But if you just copy paste this formula somewhere else, right, where these rows are not present, then there is no intersection, right? And then it will not be able to, sorry, I just copy pasted this number, so that is why it is working like that, right? But if I use this number like here, if I just press, if I just write 16 is to 16, right? Because I did not change the formula, so here you can see there is no intersection, right? So it will return me null. There is nothing there, right? So I hope that you get the point. So you can use name for doing lookup as well, right? Which is a very interesting function, right? Sometimes there are other functions that you can use, like length. Length gives the length of a character. So suppose I am writing length, right? And I am writing month name, right? So month name is the that name, and it will show you three. So for length is what it is doing is it is taking every entry of that month name array and giving the length of that, right? But this is a array function, like this is also an application of the array function which you have to learn, right? And this is how array function works. But if it is a cumulative function like sum or count, right, then it will not work in that manner. For example, if I just do count a, because these are alphabet, right? So I have to write count a. Once again, count function also we are going to cover, right? I mean, there are different methods of counting, so that also we are going to cover, right, later on. So if I just write month count a, so count a is a cumulative function. Count will give you only single number. Count is like how many, how many numbers or how many elements are there in an array, right? So if I just do that, it will return me 12, because it shows that there are 12, 12 numbers or 12 months, right? If I do a sum for this sum, obviously here it will not work. But if I do a sum for this here one, it will show me the single sum, right? So whenever there is some function which is returning single value like length, right, it will give me value for that, for that row. If I put length here and write month name, it will not be able to give me any value, right? But if I put the length here and write something, it will be able to give me the corresponding value, right? But the reverse should not happen, right? Especially for a cumulative function. Okay, so these are the things that I wanted to cover. I'm just checking my notes if I have missed something. Here I've written that index. I have already shown you how index work, how we can refer to an individual element, right? That was where we have ended last time. Okay, now we are going to apply names when creating a formula, right? So let us, let us work with maybe let me check this. Okay, so how Excel maintains cell and range names, right? So whenever we have kind of like whenever we have done something like this, whenever we have kind of uh, written something like this, right? So be very careful that you do not delete something, right? So for example, if you delete a row, or when you delete a row above the name range, or delete a row, delete a column, right? So Excel automatically adjusts. So for example, right now you know that suppose year is in C2, right? And suppose you delete this, right? So suppose you delete this. Now if you go to name manager and if you go to year, right? So if you go to year one, you can see it is automatically adjusting. It is moving from C2 to C13. Earlier it was from C3 to C15 or C14, right? But now it is from C to C13, right? So it is automatically adjusting, and probably that is what you expect, right? But sometime if you remove the sheet, right, or if you delete all the rows, then there might be problem. For example, if you delete all rows or all columns that make up a name range, right? Let me, sorry, close this. If you delete all rows and all columns that make up a name range, the name range continues to exist, but it contains an error reference, and that might be problematic, right? So suppose you delete year one, right? Suppose in this way, we are going to delete year one, right? So there is no year one. Now here if you come here, you will be able to see year one and it is showing reference error, right? So in that case, that paste list will be very very important. So if you just press F3, right, and press sorry, I did not want to do that. Let us come here, F3, paste list, right? So now if you come down, you will see that there is here one which is showing a reference error, right? So always remember, that is what I meant by using this in formula. So whenever you use this, just ensure that all the values are present, and that is why this paste list is a very very important function, right? So otherwise it might, there might be some issues, kind of pasting the values, and you might think that you've done it correctly, but it will not be done correctly, right? So whenever you delete some rows or columns, it automatically adjusts, right? But if you delete the entire row or entire column, then it might still exist. Not it might, it will definitely still exist, but that will point to a reference error, right? So that is a potential problem with the name. Okay, another simple thing that you can do with names and that is used often is, suppose you have a constant, and that constant, suppose tax rate, 30% tax rate, and you can, store that in a name variable, and that can be used to do all the calculations. So I can create something like this, and I can call this tax rate, right? And let me, here it is kind of referring to sheet, right? But instead of doing that, I can kind of create a value, right? So how we can create a value? We are going to write, say, 0.75, right? Sorry, not this. I have to remove this. Instead of using the sheet, I am going to write 0.75, right? So now my tax rate is 0.75, that is stored in a variable, right? So you do not have to kind of write it anywhere, that is not present in any cell, but whenever needed, you can, suppose I'm going to multiply this with tax rate, right? So I'm going to write tax rate, you can see that, right? So this will give me the value, right? Let me delete this, it's not needed, right? So you can see this is using the value. So this is another way to use the name to store a constant value, right? Let's see. Let's move to something else. Okay, something similar to that is storing formula. So like we have stored, constant number. You can also store something else as well. Like you can also store an maybe an alphabet as well. Suppose, for example, company, right? You might store the company name like this, and I'm going to call this uh, Blue Dragon Universe, right? BDU. Okay. I don't know if the quotation is needed or not. Some I always forget about that, so I always try with quotation. If that does not work, I am going to remove the quotation and try to see. You cannot remember everything, right? So that is how it is. So I think it worked. So I'm just going to write company, right? So here I don't have to remember anything, right? And you can always try. So you can see BDU is coming, right? So this is how you can store that. You can also store formulas, right? So for example, suppose you want to know the today's month, right? Or today's day, today's month, right? So let us try today's maybe date. So once again, we are going to cover the time and data, time and date section later, and probably in maybe in the next section or maybe day after that, we are going to cover the time and date. That is not that difficult, but it is very interesting, and very few people once again know about this. So I know about this because I have that Excel expert certification where you have to go through all of those, right? And it's very difficult to pass the exam if they ask very difficult questions. I think now they have discontinued the exam, but when I was, maybe like I just started my actual career 2015, this exam was there, and this was a very tough exam to crack. Anyways, so there was two level of exam, Excel expert 1 and Excel expert 2. So I have cracked both of those, then you get the advanced Excel advanced certification like that. Anyways, coming back to this, so here I'm calling this month, today's month of today, something like this, like month of today. Okay, so how we are going to get that? Where first we are going to write month. Now here you have to be very careful that you write the proper formula, right? It can be like, if in the Excel formula it is MON, then you have to write MON. If it is MONTH, then you have to write MONTH, right? So month, And I also have to write the proper syntax, right? It's probably better to write it in a cell and then copy that, right? So here also I'm going to put the name. So today, whatever, so month today, so automatically I've just entered the bracket. I've not entered anything in the bracket, right? So today would mean today will give you the, the date for today, right? And month will give you the corresponding month, right? Let us see if this works, right? And then I'm going to write month of today. So here I have stored a formula in a name, right? So month of today would be 3, right? You can see this. This is, I'm recording this in March 2025. So this will be 3, right? So you can write anything, right? You can store any formula, no matter how complex. If it is better that you write the formula first in a cell. Once you are thorough with the formula, you can write that in the, in the cell, right? And that is how it works, right? So now let me check if there is anything else that I'm missing. I think I've covered almost everything, but maybe there are 5, 6 things that I'm missing, right? Maybe I'll give another example. So till now we have not, like today is a function that do not use any argument, right? But what if it does use an argument? And that is where I think, suppose you want to get the first letter of this name, month, right? And you want to store a formula like that. So we already know how we can do that. We are going to write left, right? Left. This is a text function, which is our next topic. For tomorrow, we are going to do the text function, and then we are going to do the date and, the date and time, right? So here we are going to write 1. So I always kind of mention this like this, in this manner, right? And always write it in this manner, so that before we, sorry, I kept on pressing the button, so sorry about that. I'm just going to enter this. So this is how I usually, write the function, and then I'm going to copy this, right? So I'm going to copy this. So now I know that this function is going to work, right? So I'm going to copy this, go to define name, and I'm going to call this first letter. Okay, first letter. Okay, and I'm going to put that same function here after the equal to sign. Okay. So first letter, okay. I have not put the underscore here. Let me put the underscore, that should work, right? So now suppose I am going to put here something here. So I'm going to write first. Let us see if this works, right? So it is selecting the next row. You can see, right? If you put if you put a dollar sign, like if you put a dollar B3 or whatever, B13, right? Dollar B, dollar 13, then it will only point to that cell. If you do not put the dollar, like I have not put the dollar, it will point to the corresponding cell, right? Which is what I want. Here you can see, yes. Now you can, you can probably drag this, and here you will get O, and in that way, right? You can store a formula in function, in a name as well. So you can store a formula, you can store a, the constant, and you can store a, like a normal, string or character, right? So you can see how powerful this is, right? I'm just checking my notes if there is anything else that I need to cover. I believe that I've covered almost everything, right? Let me check and come back. Okay, one thing that you can see here, in this formula, first letter, right? So if I go back to this formula, which is first letter, here you can see it is referring to sheet 1, right? So if you use this formula in sheet 3 or sheet 2, it will not work, right? So let us first take the example of the first. Let us see that, or confirm that it will not work. Because why it will not work? Because it keeps on referring to sheet 1, right? So suppose I go here, and I'm going to maybe write this equal to first letter, right? You already know that. And if I press this, is it working? Okay, I think that is working, because we are in the same, so we are in the same place. Sheet 3, first letter is, let me write this first letter. Yeah, so you can see that it is not working properly, right? Why it is not working properly? Because whatever is present, so this there is a row here, and there is a column here, which we have removed here. So whenever we are writing that, because June and July both starts with J, I got surprised how it can work, right? But if you do not want this limitation, and you want to use the same formula everywhere throughout the workbook, so we have, when we define the name, we spoke about the scope here. But in this case, that is not the issue. It is not a worksheet level name, it is a workbook level name, right? So in this case, you just have to remove this sheet one, right? So you just keep the exclamation mark, but to remove the sheet one. So whenever you, whatever, whether you do sum, etc., any formula that you are going to use, if you want to kind of remove the dependence on sheet worksheet, right, just keep the kind of this function. Let's just keep this, right? And I think, am I using the right function? Why it is c5 to k5? I don't think I'm using the right function. No. I want to, yeah. So here you can see this is the right function. I'm just going to remove, get rid of the sheet one, right? I'm going to keep the exclamation mark. So if I do this, right, and if I close this, right, now you can see now it is working, right? You just saw the change, right? So now if I copy this and paste it here, so now it is working independent of the sheet, right? So it is not using a sheet to kind of refer to, right? So I think same way you can do sum, same way you can do anything else. Whenever you want to, like whenever you are using name to define formula, in order to get rid of the sheet worksheet level dependence, just get rid of that sheet one or sheet two or whatever the name is, but keep the exclamation sign, right? If you get rid of the exclamation sign, then it is not going to work, right? And I think another thing where I can stop here, like this is the last example, I believe. Let me check if there is anything else. No, I think there is one more example, right? So maybe one or two more example. So another thing is indirect. So we have already seen the use of indirect, right? But we can also use indirect in a different manner. So we know, we are coming back to this. We know April is stored here, right? This is the value of April, right? So indirect, we know it indirectly addresses, indirectly refers to the address, right? So we know April is now an address, that is why it is stored as a name. So we can write indirect, right? So indirect, okay, indirect, and then we are going to write this name April, right? APR, right? So this is referring to this name. You can see this indirect APR is referring to this. So APR contains the address of this row, and that we are referring through indirect, right? So that is how it works, right? Now, if you do this, I don't think, if you just press enter, right, it is not going to work, right? It is going to say, hey, what sort of function is this, right? So I think if you want to do this, probably you have to write Control Shift Enter. No, that is also not going to work. I just tried to do a array formula, that is not working. So what we need to actually do is, we need to, this is the array, and indirect is referring to multiple, like this is the this is the address that indirect is referring to. So we need to do a sum, a cumulative function, so that it gives only one result. So I'm basically, what I'm telling Excel is, please go to this go to this address which is represented by April. The address is this one which is highlighted, and that once we get that address, we are using sum to get the value of that, right? Now this should work. This has also not worked, that is very strange. Let me check if there is anything that I've missed. I think I have done correctly, right? So what should I have done correctly? Let me check. Instead of writing April, should I write B16? Because April is the name, right? And this sort of thing can happen to anyone, right? This is how it is. We have to kind of, whenever you are doing Excel, you might get stuck, right? And you have to identify. So I can see there is one less bracket, right? Let me check this. Yeah, I think this is working. But if I press April here, if I just write April APR, I don't think that is going to work, right? Yeah, that is not working. So if I just press B5, right? So what I am doing, what the change that I've made is, so this type of thing, as I mentioned, it can happen, right? It's just Excel, right? And you need not remember anything. You just need to know that there is a way we can do that. And if you know that, then you can figure out the way, right? So indirect is referring to the address present in this cell, right? So, and the address is April is referring to this one, right? So when April is referring to that, so there is an indirect reference of that, right? Indirect is referring to B5. B5 is referring to the address of this cell through April, and that is where we are getting the result, right? So if I just press this, we are going to get 180. Now let us see if I just remove the function, because last time it did not work. I just wanted to check if that works, right? So here, let me remove this, right? So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to write, I'm just going to check if indirect function we can use as an array, right? If that is possible. So I'm going to select B5, right? Whenever we get to the array chapter, that is probably the most difficult chapter in Excel. And we are going to see lots of example of this. But right now, let us see if we can do that, right? And what we are going to do is, so indirect is giving me only one row, right? But I think if I select all this, right, and I go here, press F2, right, and if I press Control Shift Enter, yeah, now it is an array formula and it is working properly, right? You can see there is a, the moment I press Control Shift Enter, there is a second bracket or the curly bracket that comes before this, right? And now it is working in that fashion, right? So indirect is referring to April, April is referring to this, which we are getting through array. So here you can see this is an indirect is an array function. That is why it is volatile. I mentioned this before as well. Indirect is a volatile function, right? And that is why it is heavier on Excel. It requires Excel to do or use more computing power, right? But what basically it is doing is it is showing you all the functions. If you just write in indirect and V5, then it will only show this value, right? But the moment you press Control Shift Enter after selecting the number of cells, you have to select the number of cells, right? So if you select the number of cells, then only it is going to write the proper number function. I'm going to repeat this once again because it might not be familiar with many people. Indirect, right? Now let us do for June. So that is B7, right? So indirect, okay. Now I'm going to write B7, right? So if I just press enter here, it is just going to give me one value because this array is represented. I mean, in the moment the place where indirect is in, it is showing only one value, right? So it is selecting only one cell and it is going to show only one value. So if I press enter, it is going to show 7, right? But if I have to change this, I'm going to select indirect and I'm going to select all of this, right? The all the row, I have to know how many, rows, how many entries are there in the array. Otherwise, array function will not work. And then I'm going to press F2 so that we are using this. We are kind of evaluating this, right? So F2 is kind of going into the function to evaluate what we are referring to and everything else. Now I'm going to press Control Shift Enter at the same time. So the moment I do that, yeah, I think I probably did not press Control Shift Enter properly, right? Because the bracket did not come up, right? So Control Shift Enter. Now the bracket has come up, the curly bracket, right? And now it is working. Once I taught this to one of my maybe colleague, and she thought that you have to put the curly bracket before the equal to sign to use this, and that is not how it works, right? So you have to press Control Shift Enter. The curly bracket will automatically come in, right? You do not have to put the curly bracket and you have to assume that, and then you are assuming that this is how it works. If you move over this array, right, or everywhere you are going to see the same function, right? So all these cells are referenced by same cell. You cannot change this, you cannot delete this, right? I mean, if you, for example, if you try to do that, it will ask you cannot change part of an array, right? So it is throwing an error. So all this we are going to cover in the array function chapter. That will be probably the last chapter of ours, right? And let me see if there is anything else that I need to cover. Yeah, I think I have fairly done everything else. We have also covered the array function, just given you a hint of how we can do that. So you can see how powerful name is. There will be probably multiple things that you did not know, especially the lookup, the intersection, right? And how to use the cumulative function, how you can use the name as a formula storer or as a the constant storage, right? So all these are very beautiful concepts that you can explore and do wonders, right? So that's it. See you in the next video.